Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me on this lovely Tuesday evening while I play Stardew Valley and talk about ethics. This is gonna be fun, I think. Who knows? We'll see. While we listen to this lovely little guitar music in the background, and I think of a fun name for our character that we're going to be playing as while I lull you to sleep with my smooth voice, smooth silky voice, that talk about ethics and morality with you. We'll let the intro roll before we get into class, before we start talking about ethics and morality, because this is important shit. Your bright spirit will fade before growing empties. Does anybody here feel crushed by the corporate world right now? It's sad, but it's necessary. It tells a story. I used to work a job like this, actually. It wasn't in a cubicle, but it was in an office with, like, one window. And, felt very much like Carl. Feels crushed. If you're reading this, you must be in dire need of a change. The same thing happened to me long ago. I'd lost sight of what mattered most in life. Real connections with other people and nature. So I dropped everything and moved to the place I truly belong. I'm doing a voice for the grandfather, in case. I've enclosed the deed to that place, my pride and joy. Thoughtful Farm. It's located in Stardew Valley, on the southern coast. The perfect place to start in life. This was my most precious gift of all. Now it's yours. I know you'll honor the family name, my boy. Good luck, Grandpa. Yes, if Lewis is still alive, say hi to the old guy for me, will you? So as we travel on the bus, let me introduce the lesson for today. We're going to be talking about becoming an ethical person, becoming an ethical professional. We're going to be talking about how one learns morality. And then we're going to take that a step further. We're going to look towards an institution in the U.S., police, and ask, what is the role of the police? What role should they play, and how can we, enable our police to be instilled with the morality that we've learned growing up? You must be Carl. I'm Robin, the local carpenter. Mayor Lewis sent me here to fetch you and show you the way to your new home. He is right now tidying things up for your arrival. The farm's right over here, if you follow me. I don't know why she's got an Irish accent all of a sudden. Ooh. Messy. Oh, it's a bit overgrown, but there's some good soil underneath that mess. With a little dedication, you'll have it cleaned up in no time. Robin O'Shannon. Yes. She's Irish. I don't know. It's the red hair, I guess. I don't know. And here we are, your new home. Now it's just going to become more and more pronounced every time. Hey, it's Mayor Lewis. The new farmer. I'm supposed to say hi to him from my grandfather. Come on, Lewis. Need to get to the lesson. Wasting my time. Mayor Lewis is a good person, right? Robin, also a fairly good person. Anyways, moving on. A couple ways that we learn how to be a moral person, right? Mayor Lewis, Robin. I'm sure that they learned these ways. There's generally three ways, right? And again, this actually kind of gets into psychology a little bit. I know this is ethics, right? And morality. 15 presidents these years. Okay, great. Mayor Lewis, look at that. Sneaking into my house and leaving a package. You can learn how to be a moral person through, again, psychology dictates that we learn behavior in three ways. We learn it through biological means. We learn it through psychological. They learn it through psychological means, and we learn it through sociological means, right? When I say psychological, it's like learning theory is essentially what I'm talking about. And then sociological would be like developmental theories, how we, learn by our parents teaching us, by our teachers teaching us, and by our friends teaching us. This place is awful. So let's start cleaning it up, maybe. These three methods is what teaches us how to be moral, right? Now, there were theories relating to the biological sense. That we don't really ever start with anything, right? There was a theory, and these theories have kind of essentially been dismissed at this point. But there was this theory, there was a couple theories that could go by a couple different names. Now, I realize, don't kill me in the comments if you know better than I, right? There's some philosophy major in there, a psychology major in there maybe, trying to tell me that no, there's actually little distinct differences between the two. They're generally all the same. And the three theories are the blank slate theory, the otherwise known as tabula rasa. The blank slate theory, you have the noble savage, which is actually kind of racist and insensitive when you really think about it. And then you also have the ghost in the machine. Not the anime, the theory. Though I guess arguably the anime is based on the theory. All three theories essentially state that when you're born, you are empty. Everything about you, every behavior that you ever learn, your moral compass is handed to you in life by your mother, your father, your siblings, your friends, your teachers. Just not true, unfortunately. If it were true, I mean, it would be really easy to be able to shape moral human beings, but unfortunately it isn't. Because we do start with certain things, right? Our behavior, our personalities are dictated by quite a few things. And I hope you're enjoying me clear the weeds. I don't think I'm going to be able to clear all these weeds. This is anecdotal, but it's also based upon, studies and experience from people who are much smarter than I. That, babies are born with certain sets of skills and certain behaviors. For instance, is it truly a blank slate when babies already know how to eat? Babies know how to seek out their mother by smell and hearing, right? These are things that are sort of instinctual in a way. And as a result, right, it can't be that we are empty shells ready to be inserted into whatever we can. Because even so, right, this goes towards the whole nature-nurture debate that, nurture works on what nature endows. And you need to have some sort of basis, and you are inclined towards morality or immorality as well. One of the things that they have found is that looking into the brain, there are certain neurotransmitters that do affect behavior and personality. Oxytocin being one of them. Generally, when it's produced, a lot of the traditionally moral behaviors start to prop up. Oxytocin is produced tremendously when a woman gives birth. It's an influx of oxytocin fills the brain, which causes an immediate attachment to the child. Essentially is the reason why mothers have this kind of natural affinity for caring for their children. It happens with fathers too, but it doesn't happen instantly like with mothers. So again, that's sort of one of the things that helps guide our moral behavior. Our personality is stored in our frontal lobe right up here. And let me tell you the story of Phineas Gage, in case you haven't heard. I'm sure you have at some point. I'm just going to wander around town while I talk about Phineas Gage. Phineas Gage was a railroad worker. Really, really kind guy, actually. Had a wife, had a couple kids. Was fairly honest, well-liked by all. It is a sad story, Mom Jeanson. His job on the railroad was he was in charge of tamping the blasting powder in the holes that were drilled in order to drive the spikes. But back in the day, they didn't have really high-powered drills. They take the metal rod and they jam it into the hole. And what happens when metal strikes stone or iron ore or something is it causes a spark. And that spark ignites the powder and shot the rod through Phineas's face. He didn't die. He survived. In fact, I guess he got right up and was, went to the hospital. You can look up pictures of him if you have some time. Google Phineas Gage. He has, he's still a fairly good-looking guy. Problem was, after that accident, Rod went through his frontal lobe, and his personality had changed from then on. He went from being honest to a habitual liar. He went from being, kind to easily angered. He went from, having fairly benign interest to being a gambler and a drinker, right? And this was simply because of the damage to his frontal lobe. So clearly, there is a genetic component to our behavior. It has to come from something within us. Phineas Gage shows that the frontal lobe holds a lot of our personality and essentially some of our morality as well. Oxytocin proves that neurotransmitters can affect our behavior and our attachment to others. Now, that's not all, though. Nature giving you this kind of like baseline. The nurture aspect, modeling theory, reinforcement theory, right? How do we learn? Think about how you learn. You learn by observing, you learn by doing, you learn by, it's already 7:20 p.m. I wasted the entire day talking about ethics. Gonna have to go home and sleep, otherwise I'll pass out and find myself in bed later. Modeling is a big one, especially with children. The Bobo the Clown experiment, again, psychology is probably where you heard it, where you show a child a video of, a woman playing with a Bobo the Clown doll, which is basically this inflatable doll that's kind of like a Weeble. It wobbles, but it doesn't fall down. And there, the aide will punch it and bop it and, bang it up and down. And if a kid sees that, they will participate in those behaviors. But if you show a video of the model instead playing with it, having tea with it, right, petting it, that's what the kid will do. Problem is that it doesn't just go to mirroring behavior. Unfortunately, with children, what Albert Bandura, who performed this experiment, found is that when you have the bad behavior being modeled, the child doesn't just mirror the bad behavior. They also take it a step further. The video shows, they're going to yell at me for not coming to see me. Just got back from fishing trip. You should come down to the beach sometime. I've got something for you. Willie. Something from a horror movie. The kids will take it a step further, and so while the model will never model like bad language, the child will start using bad language, right? The video is really funny because there'll be this little boy, and he just looks a little angry. And you see him, and he goes up to the thing, and he's like, "You clown, I'm gonna get you." And it's because that was never modeled. So modeling is important. Reinforcement as well. The reinforcement schedules, reinforcement of behavior through punishment or through discipline. Not necessarily the best. Don't stick away from punishment and discipline. Studies are showing that doesn't really help shape behavior. However, reinforcement of behavior through rewarding good behavior and avoiding rewarding bad behavior does a lot of good towards, encouraging behaviors that are desirable behaviors. To take this kind of one step further, because we've just been talking about behavior in general, but what about, again, that sense of morality? Where does it come from, right? Now, again, you can go towards the learning or modeling behavior and say, well, maybe it comes from like religion or something like that, because, yeah, of course, you're going to learn about, what Jesus did or Buddha did or whatnot. Let's talk to this guy. So, what do you want? Go away. Shane is an asshole. So, but he is... Now, Shane's story is actually, I believe, Shane's father is in the military and he's away, which would explain his behavior, right? He may seem like an asshole. Again, you don't just go, "What are you doing? Go away." It's kind of rude, yeah. But there is reason, there's a rationale, a reasoning for his behavior, for his demeanor. To get back to morality, right? How does it develop, right? Because morality does develop over time. You have Lawrence Kohlberg, who developed this theory of the moral stage theory, right? In developmental psychology, they love stages. The moral stages essentially say, Egg Festival, and it's Lewis's birthday on Sunday. I gotta find out what he likes. Help wanted, trying to keep the artificial alive. Pay 100 gold. To any fisherman who catches 2 chub. Not going to do that, but I'll accept the quest anyways. Kohlberg devised that basically there are 3 moral stages that you develop throughout your development as a human, right? As you grow through the stages. And they're fairly easy stages to remember. There's pre-conventional, there's conventional, and then there's post-conventional. And once you kind of understand how they work, it's actually pretty easy to understand how morality develops throughout your lifespan. Pre-conventional is being the first stage, and is essentially the stage that you're in for, maybe the first decade or so of your life, right? Again, there's no kind of hard stop like, oh, now they move on to conventional at age 8. No, there's soft barriers. And usually the way the stages work is once you master one stage, you move on to the other. And the first stage is defined as determining what is good and what is bad, or what is moral and what is immoral, based upon the reaction that you get from other people, whether or not you are praised or punished for your behavior, right? So think about it. Put yourself in the shoes of like a little tiny baby who is walking around, right? I'll use another little anecdotal story. My son is learning to stand on things now, right? So he's, 6 months old, but he'll go and he'll pull himself up on things and then he'll try to eat them, right? So there we have a thing in our kitchen that holds the dog food, and on top there's this like little handle that's shaped like a bone. Well, he'll go up and he'll pull, and it's perfect because it like goes right here to him, so the handle is like right here. He goes, and because he's teething, he looks at it and he just goes and just like eats it. Well, that's not immoral. Maybe ill-advised, but not immoral. And as a result of that, I see him do that, and I go, no, and I grab him and I take him away. Well, he may see that as a punishment of some kind. And thus, in his tiny little baby brain, he may determine that that is immoral behavior. That's essentially what pre-conventional morality is. My baby likes to eat the remote now. So does mine. That's a common thing. Little tip that my mom gave me: get an old remote that you don't need anymore, take the batteries out and just leave it on the table, and then kind of like put it in their way, and they'll reach for that one. And then they can chew on that one all they want. Like, you can disinfect it and all that. Genius. No more buying toys for your babies. And then the next stage, after they've mastered that, they move on to conventional morality. And conventional morality is just as it sounds. It's very conventional, right? It's kind of blah and boring. Vanilla morality, if you will. Not to hate against vanilla ice cream. Love me some vanilla ice cream. Conventional morality is basically the morality that is dictated by rules. Rules are, that are laid down by parents, that are laid down by teachers, and it's generally at this age, again, with the second decade of life, you're getting up to 10, 11 years old now, you're starting to realize that maybe, these government people and these adults know what they're talking about when they say what's right and wrong, right? And laws, right, criminal laws dictate good and bad behavior. Now, you are all adults, or at least I hope most of you are. I mean, we should know that just because something's illegal doesn't necessarily mean it's immoral. And just because something's moral just because something's immoral doesn't necessarily make it illegal either, right? So, conventional morality is flawed, but it's getting there, right? Again, it's based more so in the abstract, as opposed to that physical realm of pre-conventional morality, where it's based upon the reaction that you get from others. Conventional is based upon the rules that are outlined by society, by the government, by your teachers, by your parents. Finally, there is post-conventional morality, and this is generally the stage of morality that after we've mastered that and started to question the laws and rules set forth. Post-conventional morality is, again, it's after that. It's after conventional, so it's when we start to question and start to develop our own sense of morality, our own sense of right and wrong, separate and apart from those rules. And it's why we can acknowledge that while, yes, there are laws against, open container laws, right? Like an open container law that says, oh, you can't have an open alcoholic beverage in public. Wow, this man's hair is fabulous. Lives in a little cabin by the beach. Oh, you're not Willie. Oh. Gotta go meet Willie. There's Willie. Post-conventional morality. Again, we can acknowledge that open container laws, while illegal, right? It's illegal to have an open beer or an open whiskey or something like that in public. Not necessarily immoral. In fact, it can be fun. It can be amoral, in fact. It can be moral. Well, I'd have a hard time arguing that. But anyways, those are essentially the three ways that we develop morality throughout our lifespan. How do we apply that to the professional world, right? Especially when we start talking about, like, well, how do we apply that to the professional world? How do we apply that to, like, institutions such as the police? There are ways to ensure that, work groups and organizations stay moral. The problem is that once you join a group, you accept the risk. I'm getting Willie's fishing rod. That's okay. He's giving me his rod. You take on the risk that you may participate in immoral behaviors, right? And immoral behaviors. Say that like you've done everything right. Say that you have been raised properly by good parents. You were blessed with good genes. Why would somebody choose to act immorally? Because essentially it is a choice. Well, Albert Bandura has an answer for you. Remember Albert Bandura from the Bobo doll experiment? He described what he calls mechanisms. These denial mechanisms, right? For denying and participating in unethical or immoral behavior. And I'll go through a little. I have a little list right here because they're actually all really interesting, and I can give you real world examples of all of them. And you've probably used them at some point. I know I have, and you've definitely heard other people use them. One of the ones, moral justification. Moral justification is the mechanism through which you can perform immoral behavior because you have a moral justification. You have the moral high ground, right? What you're doing isn't bad because you are of a higher power. There are people who can justify, being violent to animals because they have the moral high ground. Kind of like a utilitarianism sort of thing, where like the end justifies the means too. I'm gonna pick up that shell. My inventory's full. Oh, I gotta go sell some shit. Euphemistic labeling, another mechanism. Euphemistic labeling is the idea that the behavior you're performing, you just label as something fairly benign, right? The real world example that is usually offered for euphemistic labeling is the fact that, the mafia or like gangs, when they order a murder, they call it a hit or a whack or something like that, right? It's euphemistic and it doesn't, because go murder that man or kill that man, right? Then you have to face the fact of what you're going to do. But if he says, hey, go whack him, well, I'm just going to go whack him. That's okay. And so you can be tricked into doing something a little bit immoral. Advantageous comparison is another example. Advantageous comparison being the fact that, maybe the person or group that you're performing the action on has done worse things than you are doing to them. This is very useful for fighting wars against people, right? For instance, the war on terror, right? The U.S. has done terrible things in the war on terror, but 9/11, never forget. And an advantageous comparison is all that is. I'm going to put a bunch of stuff in the back because I ran out of space. Advantageous comparison is also something that you've probably seen in American politics. Whataboutism, kind of an advantageous comparison. Displacement of responsibility. It's not my fault. I was just following orders is a displacement of responsibility mechanism for surviving or performing unethical behaviors. Diffusion of responsibility. Everybody's doing it. Well, if everybody was jumping off a cliff, would you? Yes, I would. Disregard or distortion for the consequences. Ooh, it's raining. This is stealing from a store, right? and then justifying it by saying that, well, you know, they make such a large profit. Nobody's actually really being hurt. Who's the victim here? It's an immoral behavior to steal. It doesn't matter who you're stealing from. Today, and check out affordable size 24. I do want that. And then finally, dehumanization. Dehumanization is the idea that you can perform immoral actions on another human being if you don't see them as human. On the extreme end, it's what we do to prisoners, right? We dress them all the same, we issue them a number, and then going to what the Nazis did to the Jews, right? And everybody in the concentration camps, shaving their heads, again, ridding them of their names and their valuables and anything that made them individuals. But then it's also, on a more simpler end, it's just calling your enemy by a different name, right? In World War I, the Germans were called the Krauts, right? Closed on Wednesdays. He just said to come pick up the backpack. Oh. Anyways, in the War on Terror, I'm sure that, and this is an awful, awful, awful term, but it is something that I'm sure that you've probably heard people refer to people over in the Middle East as towel heads. It's an awful, awful, awful term. But that is a style of dehumanization, reducing them down to animal-like, right? So that's what dehumanization is. Now, how do we ensure that our professional cultures do act morally? Well, sometimes the answer is ethics training. But does ethics training actually work? I don't know. It depends upon the organization. Really, in order to ensure that a organization is moral, you need to, we're going to go fishing. You need to work from the top down. There needs to be good leadership in the organization in order for it to work properly, in order for the ethical training to take. Speaking of ethical organizations and how they work together and how we can ensure that they work, let's talk about the police in the U.S. Because who more is deserving of ethical training and moral, maybe a moral lesson or two than the United States police forces? Listen. Ooh, beepy sounds. I support the police, of course, right? But I hold them to a high standard. As should you, as should all of us. How do we ensure that they stick to that standard, right? Well, first of all, we need to understand that, generally speaking, when people choose to undertake into that profession, go fishing. Whoop, that was shitty. I'm gonna do that. They view the police as in one of two ways. And the first way being what they call the crime control model, and the second way being the due process model. Just as a spoiler, I follow the due process model, but that's because I'm an attorney, right? I have to follow the due process model. That's who I am. Yes! I don't know what to do. Keep fishing, Bart. Nope. There we go. The crime control model is the idea that the police are viewed as that thin blue line between society and anarchy. Repression of criminal conduct is the most important thing to the police and to a proper criminal justice system, right? If the police go away, law enforcement breaks down, and chaos reigns. Efficiency of investigation and prosecution of crimes is the most important. And if that means that you have to bend a couple laws or break a couple rules just to get that conviction, then you go do it. That's what the crime control model is all about. The crime control model has its place. However, it's very much an authoritarian style of policing. Okay, it's putting the rights of the police and the state above those of its citizens. Because, again, it views civil rights as a burden, as a barrier to the criminal justice system. That's one way, right? And I'm sure you've met people who adhere to that system, who believe that being tough on crime is the most important, right? Law and order is the rule of the day. Very much the Tarkin Doctrine from Star Wars. Grand Moff Tarkin, for those of you that don't know, developed the Tarkin Doctrine, in which each system was going to be ruled by its individual governors, and fear would keep the people in line, right? Fear of this battle station, he says as he's standing on the Death Star. Did you know Grand Moff Tarkin suffered from Cushing's disease, which is an overestimation of the value of your battle station? That's a really funny joke if you actually know what Cushing's disease is. There is this portrayal of the crime control model. It makes for great television, right? I have this. Think about all of the really great like '90s cop movies, right? You have Die Hard, you have Beverly Hills Cop, you have Judge Dredd, you have just name one. And what you end up finding, bad cops make great movies. When you have, those being your idols, those are the people who are celebrated. Well, of course, the crime control model is going to take its place within society. However, what I suggest, we should look for police, and we should, train those to view the criminal justice system under the due process model, which is basically the polar opposite of the crime control model. Police aren't perfect, and thus we need a court system or a body of law. Oh, I don't need that. We need that system in place to protect civil rights because, police are just people. They make mistakes. They're fallible, right? That final result is not the priority. The process is more important because only by participating in the process and completing the process will we be able to achieve a proper, fair, equitable result. Prevention of those mistakes and elimination of those mistakes takes priority over simply just ramming cases through the system, right? As a result, the system becomes inefficient, right? Look at our current system, right? It's slow. It takes, on average, 1.5 to 2 years for all criminal cases for a criminal case to go from arraignment all the way through trial. But some would say, myself included, that it's worth it to ensure that we're not, putting away innocent people. So the due process model focuses on the process, focuses on the rights and maintenance of those rights, right? And it's maintaining the rights of the innocent people as well as those who are, alleged of committing crimes. Triforce. People are certainly fallible, but what happens when there are perceived and actual flaws in the institution? Good fucking question. How can I answer that? It starts with putting good people into the institution, I believe. Because part of what we just talked about, right? How do you learn and, how does a moral person commit immoral acts, right? Using Bandura's mechanisms, right? Intrinsic or systemic problems can cause even the most moral people to, flounder under certain circumstances. When I was working at the DA's office, there was this culture that, the defendants were scumbags. They weren't people, right? They were scumbags. Euphemistic labeling much? Or dehumanization much? That is the key there. There becomes this culture that you kind of indoctrinate yourself into, and as a result, that's where the bad behavior comes from, and that's why it needs to work from the top down. It may sound silly when it's don't call defendants scumbags, but it truly is sometimes as simple as that. If you avoid the dehumanization of the defendants, then you're going to treat them like people, and their rights are going to be maintained much better than if, you didn't have those rules in place. There is a problem currently in the U.S. because look at our police, right? It's almost militarized. In fact, it is militarized because the federal government has all of the surplus military gear, and through programs developed in the federal government for a variety of reasons, usually related to the high crime rates of the early 90s, you have these surplus weapons, body armor, troop carriers being essentially granted to local police departments, right? That's part of the issue, right? Is that increased militarization, and it's the kind of proactive effort to look for a certain type of person to become a police officer, that warrior model of police officer. You see the police officers with the Punisher badges and stuff. Kind of the wrong idea. Protect and serve, not punish and kill. It hasn't always been this way. Police in the U.S., first of all, I mean, was fairly unorganized up until like the mid to late 1800s. If you haven't seen Gangs of New York, that movie has its, while being fantastical, it has a base in reality. Because, you know, the 5 Points and all of the gangs in there were based on real gangs, right? Within that movie, though, the police are essentially just another gang. Fairly unorganized. They were just rough and tumble types that they recruited off the street. They were like high-ranking gang members. They were enforcers, arm breakers. That's essentially what they were. But as time went on, police started to become professional, right? Requiring training, requiring education. And they even started to hire out to private agencies that paid more, that trained more, because they did the job better. The Pinkertons in the U.S., right? They were a private detective agency. They were listed as "We always get our man." The Pinkertons evolved into the Secret Service as a result of their capabilities and their skill at investigating and performing the job, as opposed to just going out and fighting, you know, bad guys. They went out and they would just, you know, a single guy would go out and he would be armed with nothing but a picture and some paperwork on the guy and be able to find him out in the Wild West and not kill him, but like return him to wherever he needed to be. Like arrest him and bring him back to face justice, the king's justice. Now, of course, as time went on, even more training was developed. And then you have 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, crime starts rising. Why? A whole bunch of reasons, right? Part of the reason being is that the baby boomer generation started growing into what they call crime committing age, or they aged into crime, because you're most likely to commit crime at that like 18, 19, 20 years of age thing. And that's when the boomers were like, that's when they were aging into it. Well, there is a shift at that point in which policing stops being reactive and starts shifting towards being preventative. This can be because of the advent of community-based policing, problem-oriented policing. It can be because of the advent of greater amounts of technology that allows for the tracking and prevention of crime much easier than in the past. A whole bunch of reasons. One of the reasons is a lot of police departments started instituting educational requirements for their police officers. And you come to find that studies are done, and I haven't been playing this game in a little bit, you come to find that when police officers are educated, you know, the number of, wow, there's a lot of weeds here. The number of use of force incidences go down. The number of complaints against police officers goes down. I'm never making it through. Just simply educating your police and requiring them to have a higher level of education, bachelor's, associate's degree even, bachelor's degree, right, goes a long way towards ensuring that the police act morally. To get back to Triforce Dad's question and about the systemic issue, you still have a systemic issue in the design of the police. Because everything about a police officer, from their uniform to the weapons they carry to their training, is to embody authority and power and persuasion and force and raw manliness and all of that, right? That in and of itself kinda is a problem. Because if everything about you, if your persona is authority, you're going to act like you have that authority. Now, of course, the police should have authority. The police should have levels of power, right? The social contract essentially tells us that we're just gonna sell it. Oh no, we'll take those because then we'll plant them later. The social contract is what enables the police to protect us, because we grant them some power, but we also trust that they won't use that power over us. So how can we ensure that, the police don't abuse their power? Well, there's a couple things that you need. You need public access. You need fair access. Everybody needs to access it. You need a network of safety and security set up that enables the police to do their job without needing to use that force. You need that a sense of teamwork and camaraderie, not only between police officers, but also amongst the public with the police officers. And then, of course, the rules that they follow need to be objective, right? As opposed to subjective rules that are open to interpretation by the individual. You need objective standards of behavior that a police officer can objectively follow given any situation, so that, when it comes to questioning his behavior. Without that objectivity, you end up getting, different styles of policing, right? Historically, there have been a couple. The legalist style of policing, who's the by the book, the one who will arrest his own grandmother if he could. Well, not if he could, but if she broke a law. The watchman style of policing, which is kind of like that old school police officer who kind of like walks the beat and, catches kids doing something stupid and he goes, "Get out of here, you kids, go home before I call your mothers." The social servant policing, who really takes that serve part of protect and serve seriously, volunteers a lot, participates in social programs, works the soup kitchen. And then you have the crime fighter, who is the one that believes that policing is just about running around and shooting your guns in the air and going, "Ah," right? That is part of the issue. Police have a lot of discretion at their hands. They have to, because they're out in the middle of, society dealing with the worst of the worst on occasions. So they need to be enabled to have the ability to utilize force, to utilize their discretion as they see fit. Now, we do have formal ethical codes for police officers. Those formal ethical codes, are usually kind of policy oriented, and there is a national database, right? The International Association of Chiefs of Police do have a formal ethical code for officers. It's non-binding, but it is something that is taught to most officers. Formal ethical codes are great, and especially if they are bright line rules that prevent you from, what the fuck, I just wanted to buy something from him. Store closed, I guess. But the problem is that you also have kind of this conflicting idea of the police subculture that sometimes goes against that ethical code. And as we walk back to home, I'll finish on this. Police culture, right? And we'll talk about this in a future lesson. The police subculture, the blue curtain of silence, and the idea behind noble cause corruption and all that. It is backed up by long-standing... I keep hitting my door with the thing. It is backed up by long-standing traditions and systems put in place and socialized behaviors by police officers for generations. In order to try to change it whole hog would require to do something that to change it whole hog would require you to basically start from scratch. There is, I believe Minneapolis is doing that. They fired like their entire police force and said, we're designing it from the ground up. There are other ways. In order to keep the police honest and fair, civilian review boards, which is something that is being looked at by a lot of municipalities nowadays. But fighting against the police subculture is the biggest deal currently. There are a lot of police officers who still believe that, it's the badge and the brotherhood is most important, and damn the lawyers and damn the rights, and anybody who doesn't support us is a piece of shit and all that. That shit's got to go. Once we get rid of that, when I go to sleep in the night, we'll be able to take great strides forward into making sure and ensuring that the police are more ethical and are more moral. And that is it for the lesson today. Thank you all for joining me. If any of you did enjoy this content, please drop a follow. I will be doing this every Tuesday. We will be playing Stardew, or maybe even some other game. I don't know. I couldn't really focus on the farming aspect. And talking about subjects next week. We'll be diving deeper into the role of the police. If you're not one of my friends or one of my students, feel free to subscribe. That's always good too. It'll enable me to do more with these streams if you enjoy it. And also, I stream on other nights, but not teaching. If you don't want to watch me teach, but you did like my personality, I'll be here on other nights. And thank you for joining us.